I'd like everybody to settle in, and I'm so excited to invite you to meet one of my dear friends, Dr. Lisa Goldberg. And I'm going to read you her bio. She's an associate professor and a Caritas coach in the School of Nursing, Faculty of Health, and is it Dalhousie University?
Dalhousie University.
Great.
Yeah.
And she lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And she is so innovative, so exciting, and she's one of the most incredibly creative people I've ever met, which you are going to get to meet with her. She's a member of the 2SLGBTQ plus community. And she's going to tell us all about that, because her work is really one of the things that she's done that I think is really, really incredible, is how to meet the needs of diversity, the inequalities, and how we can really come together as human beings, despite our differences and our different orientation in life. And her work that she's doing, she has many creative projects she's doing, and she has a project that she's doing where she's taking into community theaters, and it's a way to reach out to people and teach people about, to me, it's an incredible innovative project of things of what nurses do when they're out, when they're passionate about communities and meeting their needs. So Lisa, I'm so excited for you to tell us about what you're doing and how we can embrace the future, embrace this incredible diversity and complex world that we're living in, how we can meet the needs of different people, and how we can do it in creative and innovative ways, because really you're in the future already. So that's what I'm excited about with interviewing you. There are people who are going to talk about the future, and there are people who are in the future already making things happen. And I want you to tell us and tell the listeners, what are some of your visions, and what are you doing, and how did you make it happen, and how can other people follow this the Blair tracing that you're doing in making these new innovative ways?
Okay, thank you, Mary. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. A couple things I want to say first, just because I feel for the energy so positive, but I do want to say, as we all know, we're in many ways, we're in an unprecedented time. So we're challenged for sure with COVID-19. And I do live in Nova Scotia, and it would be inappropriate of me to not mention, over the weekend, there was a mass murder in a very small rural community, Portapique, which is not very far from where I live. 22 people, including an RCMP officer, were murdered. And this is something that we would never imagine seeing. So Nova Scotia and the whole country is in mourning. And so maybe we'll just take a moment of silence, if we might, for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you. So that energy is a challenge, but being someone who's also a nurse educator and researcher, you have to move beyond that and find joy and move forward. And so one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is the heart, because in all the work I do, which does deal a lot with equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think if you do it from another perspective and you don't use the heart, I think we lose everybody. And I've been reading something recently by a GP in the UK, Rangan Chatterjee. And he has this beautiful piece about, although the heart, as we know, oxygenates the body, the heart is magical. It's been embraced by poets and musicians and storytellers. And so sometimes a lot of people, particularly who are in academic environments and healthcare environments, don't value the heart. But the heart has such a beautiful history of doing more than the science. And it connects us to ourselves and to others. and it helps us with love and all those sorts of things. And we also know with the evidence that if you don't have that connection and you are isolated, your health outcomes are significantly reduced. So as nurses, our heart has to be front and center. And so with the work I do, and it is around areas that are with, I'm going to shorten the 2S LGBTQ+, but I will say it's Two-Spirit. I have to remind myself of the acronym, Two-Spirit, 2S, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and the plus is there because actually that acronym is reduced and there can be certainly more folks along that continuum. You could identify as gender queer, you could identify as gender fluid, you could be polyamorous, you could be many other things within there. So that's why the plus sign is there, just to be more inclusive. So a lot of the work I do, I began, I have a career that was very different. I began as a modern or contemporary dancer. And when I called home and said, I'm switching my major to zoology, my father said to come home now. And I then went on to study philosophy. And I can't say why, but when I finished studying philosophy and I taught English in Japan for a year, I came home and I sat down and tried to reflect on what I wanted to do, and nursing came to me. And nobody but my mother felt it was a fit. And I went to nursing school and fell in love with nursing, right? And so as time went on and I finished my PhD and came to Dalhousie and took up my position, it just occurred to me that I began the work around queer birth, right? Same-sex couples and birthing, because nobody was doing any of that work. And that sort of began my passion and love for that work, because I also identify as part of that community. And that's just catapulted into much more artistic ways of doing that research, because now I confess doing it the usual way is kind of boring now. So we began with, we had these beautiful narratives of women who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer across the province of Nova Scotia. We had their incredible stories of having babies. And we felt that, wouldn't it be amazing to put it into a performance, into a play? So we worked with an incredible playwright and director in the city. She turned the transcripts into an incredible play. We hired 4 queer identified actors, and it was basically 3-4 sold out performances. I think it was 3, 2 at night and 1 in the afternoon. And honestly, when I saw it for the first time, the 2 of us who were the researchers, we couldn't stop crying. So we said, we need to get this out of the way or we'll be like spectacles at our own performance, because we'll be sitting there crying the whole time. But it was just amazing. And we waited a little bit of time because we knew we wanted to do something else with the play. And so now we have collaborated with other researchers across the province, with other theater folks and queer community activists. And now we have more federal funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And we're going to be, in the spring of 2021, we'll hopefully have some of the same actors. I don't know if we'll get them all. We hope we will, but we may not. We'll be taking the performance across the province. So very exciting.
Very exciting. Wow.
So that's kind of a snapshot of some of the things I'm doing, and then of course the wonderful teaching I'm doing, and that also is a lot of queer and trans, 2S LGBTQ+, and caring science and those sorts of things in the teaching as well.
You know what really, really excites me is in the evolution of research. And how we can be researchers and explore a phenomenon with getting people's real stories and being able to really, because when I was a researcher, I was I worked with Maximian Madden and was looking at the lived experience of someone who used art as a way of healing. I absolutely love this idea of you taking out, getting your data, getting this material, and then transforming it into a project that becomes theater and that reaches out to people in such a deep and meaningful way. And I think that excites me so much that that could be the future of how we translate data collection into letting people know what it is we're finding out about. It, to me, I want to know more about it. What are more ways that we can do that? What are more ways that we can?
Yeah.
There was one speaker who talked about making art with stories of women who had hot flashes and menopause. And I am just so excited about this idea of collecting data and making art. Tell me more.
I think this
come to you.
I think it's magnificent. Now, at some point, we need to talk about the challenge of funding.
Right.
That's where we're challenged. But I think the idea of so a great example is a graduate student. I'm on his committee. Brilliant. He's not a nurse, but he's a dietitian.
Right.
And he did. Oh my goodness. He had his participants take photographs of their experiences.
Right.
And then he had them write a little piece about them. And then there was kind of an art show of the photography with the participants who took the photos to talk about it. It was absolutely fantastic. Now, something else that he did, brilliant, he got funding through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research with a couple of other students. And you know what they did with some findings? They put it into, it's almost like a comic book. So it's this gorgeous, artistic, graphic, kind of almost novel comic book. Beautiful. So there's another way.
Yes.
Photo novella, photo voice. There's so many wonderful things. Someone else I know, he actually danced his dissertation.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I think the more creative, I also remember when I did my PhD, I was taking this wonderful course in narrative inquiry with Jean Clendenin. Amazing. She's at University of Alberta. She actually had 2 PhD students. It was very hard to get this approved, but I remember there were 2 PhD students who actually did their PhD together. So their dissertation, this artistic narrative, was done collaboratively. Wow. I'm not sure if that was ever allowed again.
Right.
But there's another example. So I think, especially for nurses, there are so many amazing ways to take experiential data and turn it into something artistic and beautiful and stimulating and exciting, because for the most part, the public is not going to read a research article. And quite honestly, most of them I don't want to read these days. And I know I'm saying that out loud as a researcher and someone who does it, but a lot of them, they're not impactful. And even when you look historically, what's impactful? Certain kinds of stories, when you think about the Second World War. Anne Frank's story, that is a story that impacts every single person who reads that, right?
Exactly.
Film is something that impacts everybody. So there needs to be an emotional component. And again, there's been research on that. When you have that emotional piece, and certainly when you're doing the work that I do around historically underrepresented communities, to try and have folks understand what their experiences are like in healthcare when they're not listened to, when they're discriminated against. And it's not about bad nurse or bad physician, but trying to help people understand what their experiences are like, to see it in an artistic way where it's not threatening and you get that emotional response. It's remarkable what happens, because they can go away and really think about, wow, that's what's happening. I wonder if I did that too. Does that resonate for me? But there isn't a fear, or there isn't there's no guilt. I mean, you can sit and watch and have a reaction and go away and think about that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And now with the Play Across the Province, we're going to do workshops as well, theater-based workshops. So we have theater folks who are going to do around theater and empathy,
Right.
and you know, queer and trans folks. And
Right.
then we're going to do ones around health, queer and trans, and looking at that into a policy brief. So it's then taking the artistic piece and
Wow.
turning it into a document that actually may have impact around how things are done. So there is another level of that, which is very exciting. Yeah.
That is awesome. That
Yeah.
is awesome. And based on your experience, you know, really embracing this body of work and this community, tell me what you see the future is for nurses to meet the needs of people in this community.
I think we have incredible potential. I think nursing, well, of course, I think nursing is the most incredible profession and discipline in the world. And I say that having come from dance and philosophy. So I feel I have other things that I've done to say that. But we have not actualized our potential or our power in a good way. But we have not actualized that. And I often talk to students about that, and I often sit and reflect on why. Part of it is our historical backdrop,
Right.
our gendered history, our history of beginning in the military and the church, and some of that continues with us.
Right.
I was reading something recently about some of even the trauma of nurses having worked and for no money and treated horribly. There's a wonderful book by a former colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Barb Ketty. She wrote a beautiful book, The Lamp is Heavy, and it's about Nova Scotia nurses in the 50s and their oral histories. They're beautiful. But again, it talks about how nurses were treated in the 1950s. And when I share that with students, they're shocked about how they were treated, right? So that legacy is still with us partly. We've made some incredible advancements, but as a collective, we have not actualized our potential. Something else I was looking at, I think it was recently, an article in Advances in Nursing Science. It's by Dr. Marlene Smith.
Right.
And yeah, and this was around the interdisciplinary work. I absolutely am a huge fan of that, the interdisciplinary, interprofessional. And she had a wonderful thing that she talked about that, yes, of course she's a fan, but we can't do that work unless we can't come to the table, all of us together, in a deep and nuanced way, unless we also first understand who we are ourselves, and as nurses. And that's my challenge, because if we're engaged in all that interdisciplinary work and we don't first understand really the ontology of what nursing is, how then do we find ourselves at the table with the vision we need if we don't first understand what nursing is? And I think that gets to, you know, what is that vision? How do we as nurses work with historically underrepresented communities in the future? And I think we have a great future to do that. But part of it, aside from the heart, is that we have to be really politicized as citizens, politicized around this kind of work, and understanding that we have amazing potential. And we are not our past. We need to understand our past, but we are not our past. Our future is incredible.
Tell me what you mean politicized. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so when I think about what it is to be politicized, I know I'm often called to task on explaining that. Well, I think part of it goes to, you know, when I do teaching, it is partly around beginning to understand equity, diversity, and inclusion, for example. Things around issues like equity and equality are not the same thing, and what does that mean for nurses? Understanding for nurses that a lot of times when I'm teaching, you know, often the understanding is, oh, right, yes, of course, we care for patients who are members of queer communities, who are members of Indigenous communities, who are members of African Nova Scotian communities and of African descent. But one thing they're forgetting, and of disabilities, etc. But one thing they're forgetting, nurses are also part of these communities, right? Nurses are also members of queer communities, members of Indigenous communities, members of communities with disabilities, members of African Nova Scotian and African descent. And one of the, I think that's part of the politicization of nurses, that they are not other, we are also them, and they are us. That's a really little piece, but I think that's so important. It's also understanding, because a lot of times in the teaching of nursing, we talk about the individualized care of the patient or the client. And a piece of that's important, but one of the challenges, again, with historically underrepresented communities is recognizing that these communities in their own ways have had historical traumas and harms. And when you enter that room or enter that relationship, you have to be cognizant of some of those harms when you go in there. So it's not just about that individual person, but it's about a whole history, much of which may be trauma, is coming with that. And so that's part of being politicized and understanding some of that work as a nurse. And once we begin to understand and unpack some of that, I think our potential is amazing, because we are everywhere healthcare is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how do you see us accomplishing that? What are some specific ways in we can do that?
Yeah, and that's another great question. Well, one of the ways is, as educators, first of all, we have to have that knowledge base in order to share that with the students we have the privilege of working with. That's one thing, right? And that's one of the challenges when we ourselves don't have that knowledge. And that's a critical piece of the knowledge. Even, added to Carper's ways of knowing was socio-political knowledge, right? That was added later by, I think, Jacoby, or I can't remember the name, but that was added later. So having us have that knowledge is critical, number one. Not being afraid to recognize that you don't have all the answers. And apologizing. I always say to students, for the 10 questions you ask me, I might have the answers to 5. And I'm very happy to say that. And then I will find out, or we can find out together, what the answers are to the other ones. And I also think, my whole pedagogical approach to nursing, to life in the world, was transformed when I became a Caritas coach.
Really? That's great.
Yeah. And so I often think that kind of education in certain ways has amazing potential to offer us a different vision of what nursing is. It certainly did for me, right?
Well, tell us a little bit about that, because not everybody knows. I've been introducing Caritas coaches, but I realize they might not know what that is. So if you could tell me.
Yeah. So through a really interesting journey, I brought myself to the Caritas Coach program, largely based on feedback from students. I felt my evaluations were not where they needed to be. I felt I was losing my love of teaching. And I started on this wonderful journey that began with the Center for Learning and Teaching, and doing some shifts. And it was around the heart. My heart was second, because I came initially from philosophy, which is about argument and critique. And that was coming out before my heart. And students were recognizing that. It was fascinating. And so as I started to reimagine how I should be engaging these tweaks, I started looking, and all of a sudden I was at the Watson Caring Science Institute site, and I decided, don't think, don't analyze, sign up and do it. And I did. And so the Caritas Coach program, at that time, it wasn't online, it was on site with the 2 intensives, which I think worked beautifully for me. It's an amazing program, which really is about beginning to understand how you live caring science on a daily basis, not simply as a professional, but
Right.
also in your personal life. And the beautiful thing, one of the many beautiful things about caring science, it's not just a theory, right? It's not just this ontology and epistemology, knowledge and ethics. There's 10 Caritas processes that give you a living, breathing example of how to live in a way that puts your heart first and helps you understand when your ego gets in the way. It helps you understand how do you create these relationships when some days you just don't want to do it, right? It's this wonderful way that also begins with the place of the self. And that's, I think, one of the other beautiful things about this theory is many others don't do that. This basically says that you can't create those loving, caring, compassionate relationships with others unless you first understand how to do that with yourselves. And most of us don't know how to do that with ourselves. So that's how, that's, you know, there's much more to that, but that's kind of the basics of the beginning of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was a beautiful synopsis of that experience and how powerful that is in transforming people's mindset and being able to practice and live from our hearts where you started. I wanted you to take a few minutes to share about your gift.
Oh, my gift.
Yes.
So, boy, Mary really challenged me on that one, which was wonderful because she gave me all kinds of ideas. So I am obsessed with tea, and anyone who knows me knows I have a massive teapot collection both in my apartment and in my office.
Yeah.
And through the Caritas Coach program, when I redid my graduate course, one of the things that I came up with was my tea trolley. So in the graduate course, I literally take a tea trolley to class.
Right.
And when I taught it at the master's level, there were 20 students. So I came with pots of teas and tea cozies and mugs and teacups. Oh, people were in heaven. But it changed the whole philosophy of the class. So because nursing philosophy is often it's a little scary for a lot of nurses. Well, when I came in with the tea trolley, all the fear went away. We sat around. It was like being in one of the wonderful cafes with the French existentialists, right? It was
that is fantastic.
Yeah. And so then I thought, well, you know, it's unfair to the undergraduates. They're not getting my trolley. And so I can't take the trolley across the university. But what I did do is I get a box and I put all kinds of teas in the box, inspirational pencils, and even stuffies. Sometimes if I have little stuffed animals, I put those in there too. And so for the gift, I decided I would do a little video of tea, and I ended up doing a tea scrub. So I made a tea scrub for everyone, and you know what? It's beautiful. I've used it 3 times already, and it's so good you could probably eat it with all the ingredients.
I love it.
What it inspired me to think about is I would love to do a whole video series based on the 10 Caritas processes and tea, and then write about that. Wouldn't that be fun?
Fantastic.
Yeah, because
I challenge you to do that.
I know, and I don't think anyone's done that. So I thought that would be something innovative to do and then publish, and I could put the video links.
Yes.
Probably on my Dalhousie. I think they'd let me put that on my Dalhousie site. I think they would, especially if I wrote something about it. Yeah. So that was wonderful. Thank you. That really, I had to sit and think, what am I going to do? Because I don't have a course I can gift.
Right.
But tea to me is, you know, it's part of my professional life as well as my personal life. So I had a grand time doing that. And I had my cat with me. Petunia was there too.
Lisa, you are incredible. I am so happy that you agreed to do this interview. And I am just blown away. I feel that your energy is just so inspiring and so creative and so expansive. And what, you know, I think honoring, one of the things that I'm finding with this telesummit is how do we reach out and honor each other and illuminate each other and what we're doing. And to me, that's how we're going to create the future. We're going to be, you and I live far away from each other,
Yeah.
but on some level, there's this beautiful connection and how we're
Yeah.
all connected to each other.
It's
So
amazing, isn't it? And
it's amazing. And I think, go ahead.
no, well, none of this would have happened if if COVID-19 didn't
I
happen.
know. And
So
it's such a turning point.
yeah,
A turning point for a shift for all of us. And it's also an awakening. It's an awakening of how can we deal with the pain and suffering? How can we connect to each other? How can we take a moment of grief or a moment of grace? How we can be there for each other in this world at this moment in time? And how can we do things with joy and a way of transcending the
yeah.
suffering that's all around us? So
Yeah, it's I can't watch the news. I try and watch once a day, and that's all I can do because some of it is just so horrible. And to the nurses and the physicians and all the frontline workers, excuse me, they are remarkable. But I'm
remarkable.
so concerned for them and their families, and so many other people globally. It's shocking.
It's shocking, but I think in this moment, the visibility of what they've offered forever in the silent, COVID has illuminated those moments that we share with patients all the time, even when there's not this
I
virus,
know, and
that they're right there taking care of we're taking care of each other.
yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much. This was so
Thank you.
beautiful. It was so
Yeah.
great. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you, Mary. This was really wonderful to do. It just gave me such a lift. And so now I think I'm going to make myself go out and have a little walk.
I love it. Me too. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.